Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to the other panelists for your contribution too. I just wanted to start by saying that today it marks 1 year since the bombing of Al Ali Hospital. And on that day, hundreds of sheltering and wounded Palestinian people were killed in a rocket strike. For days, I'm sure many people here will remember international media debating back and forth as to whether the rocket was fired from Israel or not. The reason why I start with this anecdote is not just because it's 1 year since the attack, but because that debate just feels so ridiculous in hindsight. Mock outrage was abound, with international press believing that it was impossible that Israel could have targeted a hospital so brazenly. Now, that sentence would be laughable if it weren't so utterly abhorrent. By the end of November, only weeks later, 30 of Gaza's 36 hospitals had been bombed. But direct targeting of medical professionals, whether it's bombing hospitals or shooting at paramedics, is only part of the story. What we're here to talk about today is the General's Plan, as it's been dubbed, which includes the restriction of food and medical aid and the forced displacement of Palestinians in northern Gaza. I don't think I can paraphrase it any better than what an Israeli soldier said themselves when asked. They said, "The goal is to give the residents who live north of the Netzarim area a deadline to move to the south of the Strip. After this date, whoever will remain in the north will be considered an enemy and will be killed." The next word that I'm going to use is not one that I use in a hyperbolic or a rhetorical manner, but rather simply in a historically accurate manner. And that word is medieval. The use of blockade and starvation against civilians in this manner is implementing genuinely medieval siege tactics on hundreds of thousands of Palestinian people in northern Gaza. The immediate effect is ethnic cleansing, and the resultant effect is genocide. The rhetoric around this strategy is not new. So Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant's now infamous quote, which I'm sure many of you know, reads as such: "We are imposing a complete siege on the city of Gaza. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly." That statement was over a year ago, about a year ago. When pushed as to whether Israel had the right to restrict these items listed, then leader of the opposition, now Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, he squirmed before saying, "Israel does have that right." The extent of the restriction of medical aid was evident as far back as a year ago, with doctors reporting that they had been forced to use vinegar and washing up liquids as antiseptic sterilization, and that they had to use intravenous paracetamol in place of appropriate painkillers for surgeries, including on children. But without diminishing the extent of the siege tactics that have already taken place in Gaza over the last 12 months with complete impunity, reports from the ground now say that the use of starvation as a weapon of war is being institutionalized on an unprecedented level. And that is what we're talking about when we're talking about the General's Plan, named after Major General Yuri Eiland of the Israeli military. He's long been reported in the Israeli press, including major outlets such as Haaretz, talking about and suggesting the use of starvation and epidemics as legitimate weapons of war to be used against the Palestinians. Now, last Friday, the World Food Programme announced that no food aid at all had entered northern Gaza since the start of the month. And even before this, aid entering Gaza was at its lowest level in months. Only 4% of food getting in was needed to sustain the million people who were reliant on WFP food. So it appears to everyone that the general's plan is already in motion. But what are the effects of that? So only earlier today, hours ago actually, the World Food Programme released their latest assessment on food insecurity and famine. That said that 91% of Gaza, 1.95 million people, faced acute food insecurity over winter. If you think that's bad, then that figure published today was based on data collected in September. So that's actually the situation as it was before the implementation of the general's plan. What the figures are now are genuinely anyone's guess. But I think the most important point to make here is the interconnected nature of these genocidal policies. So as more people starve, diseases arising from their frailty and malnutrition will increase. As people are displaced yet again by Israel's latest evacuation orders, the constant displacement will increase unsanitary conditions, unhygienic conditions, which is why Palestinians in Gaza have been suffering from epidemics and outbreaks of polio and cholera. And as people are driven south, displaced once again, the concentration of people will increase further in what is already one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. So with all that in mind, the restriction of aid, including medical supplies, is a death sentence for Palestinians. These policies, by their very design, are constructed to make Gaza incompatible with the conditions of life. Under Article 6 of the Rome Statutes, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part constitutes genocide. And there is a further element that may well be linked to the general's plan too, and this is still developing as we speak. So only in the past few days, we now know that there have been increasing restrictions on doctors, with many turned away at the border. And in a story that's still developing, according to the Institute of Middle East Understanding, certain humanitarian organizations have now been outright banned from entering Gaza to provide healthcare provision. This shows the full all-encompassing effect that I'm talking about, of how these different policies are designed to bring about this total siege against Palestinian civilians. It is collective punishment on a coordinated scale that can only be described as systematic extermination and genocide of the Palestinian people.